All right, welcome back to the Weekly Boost Podcast, episode 43. We're closing out our ACS May campaign with cancer research, and we're going to talk about something that happened 100 years ago today and tomorrow when this releases. A pretty important thing that gets left out of history books and collective recollection a lot of times. But I thought I saw Cubby back there. How are you doing, Austin?
Doing all right. Finally enrolled in all my courses, so that was a big sigh of relief. But
yeah, isn't that
tugging away? Yeah,
especially because we come from smaller schools where it's like you're guaranteed to get your classes and graduate in 4, sometimes 5, depending if you have a COVID year or things like that. And when you log into that portal, it's like, okay, 2 of 5 seats remain. You're like, oh my goodness, like I got to get them. Like, especially with a master's program, it's like,
yeah, you brought that up, and I just talked with my advisor, and she was telling me about how it's very different than the undergraduate system where you have say 25 seats for a course, right? And unless you have a really high priority enrollment status, you always have to play the betting game whether or not I'm going to get in that course, and you have to have 3 backups. Well, for this, it's really up to the instructors to the amount of courses or amount of students that they have for their course, and so the seats never fill up, and if they do, there's almost always a way to kind of weasel your way into the thing. As much as you want to believe that you have to be the first one there to get it done, I've been learning as I've gone through this process that it's okay to just wait. Patience is really, really important with this, because you'll be bombarding the faculty and staff with millions of emails about, hey, I need to get, hey, help me override this restriction and stuff. It's been a fun learning curve for
You'll start learning that too, because I went through the same thing last April, last May. It was like, okay, what do I have to do to get it? And then it's like you have to realize everybody else has their summer projects, especially for historians. They want to get a lot of writing done in the summer and reading as well. But today, I mean, you notice we're both wearing our shirts, and
that's right. There they are.
As of today, when we're recording this Friday evening, we still have 5 left. So. Our campaign isn't quite done yet when we drop this episode, and we'd be happy to send those to you still, and find a way to donate to ACS still. And I don't think it necessarily shuts off on June 1st, but I think we've been bombarded with support, and it's when we look at that number that we've got so far, it's like, wow, that's really incredible what our little podcast community is capable of, and
exactly.
It's been good, and we kind of started let's get shirts, and didn't know how those would do, and those kind of took off, and it's been a really good learning experience, and we're really happy that we could partner with the American Cancer Society and kind of bring you guys to some things that you might not necessarily know. I was talking, this was with my mom earlier about the podcast, because they were down in Nashville. They talked to John England, one of our previous guests, and they were like, yeah, it was a good podcast, and it really makes me think about some of the things, and take on a new perspective, which is kind of what we're all about, right? And we haven't used that word in, I don't know, it feels like 8 episodes, but here it is again.
I think Cassidy was the last time I know. Perspective.
or I think Coach Mosley did, but regardless, it's like, if we can have other people start to see something differently, maybe we're wrong, that's fine too. But I think having these types of conversations, and we'll have a deeper conversation today too, and I'm looking forward to it because of some of the implications, especially where I live right now and where you're about to live in a couple of months, is it's kind of heavy. But do you want to get into it? I don't want to drag our feet too much.
Kind of, I guess before we even bring up what we're going to talk about, just the idea of what I saw kind of foreshadowing the topic of discussion for this episode. But when I first came across it, it was something that I never even heard of. And so Ben and I's conversation in this episode is going to kind of allude you to that feeling of just starstruck is the wrong word, but it's that kind of feeling where you're looking at something and you're not even quite sure how to wrap your head around it, because you feel as if it shouldn't have existed and it shouldn't have happened. And the only way for you to know about it is to obviously relive through the stories that people told and people have written down, as well as pictures, and just the enigma surrounding it that I had never heard of, even that made it even more powerful to learn about it. And we're going to get into it right now, but yeah, go ahead, Ben, with
No,
kind of.
for those of you who don't know, today and tomorrow are the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre in Oklahoma. It was a time in 1921 that the African American community, following emancipation after the Civil War and following the land runs in Oklahoma, really saw the West as part of this great migration too, that they could find ways to make a living and be self-sufficient and have their sort of independence that had been stripped from them. And even people coming from the North and seeking other opportunity. And there's a really significant African-American population and community in Tulsa at this time. And they have what's deemed as the Black Wall Street. And it's this neighborhood, Greenwood, the Greenwood district in Tulsa, that I think it's on the northeast side of Tulsa. That's just a really affluent community and full of intellectuals and Black businesses, and it's just this really seen as this threat from white population at the time. And obviously at this time, racial tensions and even as they ring through today are running high. And it was on. So all of this, I have links to all of this if you want to learn more, because the stuff that we're going to get into later might maybe not polarize people, but like jar people and cause like a visceral reaction. And that's not what we plan to do. Like I want to preface by saying, like, we're students too. Like we want to learn more and understand perspectives and what some of these things mean and how we can work through them. But I just wanted to preface that too right now, just, because I know we talked about this too. Like we're not necessarily in a position that we can get away with saying things, and we don't want like some things to come across and then, not haunt us, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like as a smaller group, with the way cancel culture is and everything, it's very intimidating sometimes for us to speak freely with, career implications on the line. So I just want to preface by saying, like, we're trying to talk through these things and bring light to a subject that has been neglected for 100 years, even in the state of Oklahoma where this happened. So essentially the overview is Dick Rowland, an African-American young man, is in an elevator operated by a white woman. And there's various accounts of what happened, if he tripped and like grabbed her to brace the fall, or if he assaulted her. Like there's still some ambiguity with it, but either way, this sort of violence ensues after that, where whites are essentially getting a lynching crew, a mob together because of this black man, white woman assault. So it ends up with the killing of 300 people is what the estimate is. I think they actually just think they found some mass graves. Archaeologists this past year, that was a big thing my fall semester we talked about. And essentially almost all of Greenwood gets destroyed through burning. And if you listen to some of the survivors' oral histories that emerge out of this and historical projects out of this, it's this time of chaos for 2 nights. The Greenwood district burns. There's a New York Times article I looked that has a really, really good depiction of what this place looked like at this time. I didn't show you this because we haven't really talked much this week, but it's a really cool depiction. I don't like using cool in this sense, but it's a really moving depiction of what this neighborhood looks like. This theater that's this really, it's one of the largest theaters in the United States, and it's African-American owned. And it's really this, like I said, this affluent African-American community that that is threatening to white population who hadn't necessarily seen something like this of this magnitude.
Yeah.
And there's at one point there's planes that drop explosives from the skies on Greenwood. It's just this really, really dark time in American history that I don't know about you. Like I don't physically remember something like this coming up. And if it did, it was, a half a page in a textbook in a chapter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this is something that's, sorry, I'm talking a lot because this is kind of like right up my alley, but it's like something that's super important. The mass, murder of 300 some people because they were black. And regardless of the origin story of how this incident happened, the fact that the resorting to burning the entire cities, and there's internment camps that they're held in, that because it displaced a lot of people, and they're held in internment camps around Tulsa before they're able be replaced into homes. But even then is like this, we talked about it last week with this like power dynamic. And you can imagine not having a home and losing your entire savings. And it's a really dark time in American history that doesn't get talked about. And meanwhile, we have things that are being passed to try to uplift American history and present a certain image of it that might not necessarily be true. And it's just, it's very frustrating time right now.
Well, I want to touch on what you were talking about with, the lack of us having learned this in high school or at our early education level. And the story that I was talking about before you went in and just kind of described what I was trying to allude to, that was my first impression and my first experience with the Tulsa Race Massacre. I had known for a fact that I've never heard of this, and it was something that struck me in a way that made me feel, first of all, I was empowered by what the University of Oklahoma had put together in the library on like the demonstration and the kind of memoriam and museum type thing that they had, showcasing what happened and giving an explanatory depiction of how and why things went down. And again, that was my first experience with this. And so from that standpoint, the immediate reaction was disgust, because I was absolutely horrified and disappointed that something like this happened, all because, like you mentioned the origin story, but from what I took of it, African Americans in the city of Tulsa were becoming more and more affluent and more successful than their white counterparts or their white neighbors, and that struck a chord with them, and then they decided to take action in their own hands in a very negative and destructive and violent, on top of a racist driven ideology. And so that struck a nerve with me, because again, I like to think that our country is primarily founded on ideals of equality for all people and equity, and the belief that everybody has the right to be free in their own way and express themselves, and all these things that are granted to us by the bills and doctrines that we hold ourselves dear to and we pledge allegiance to under a flag. Like there's a reason why we have these things. But you see events like this, things that kind of get swept under the rug that I wasn't ever taught in high school, or you were never taught in middle school, that make you question the legitimacy of the values that we hold dear to us as a country. Because probably the people that either immediately did this event or subsequently after, like a couple years after, probably believed that they were being some sort of progressive patriot and trying to reclaim some of their lost, their lost entitlement as a United States citizen, because they were being, in a way, disadvantaged by the up and coming and risingly affluent African American community. And so there's that sense of that reverberates all the way back to 1776 and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the idea of patriotism and what it means to be an American citizen. Well, we hold near and dear these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and all this sort of stuff, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, you see events like this and it makes you fundamentally question whether or not these ideals are in the place in the minds of every single citizen that, you know, believes them, because stuff like this would not have happened if, and now here we play the if game, but
Yeah.
you know, if these ideals were actually ideals and values, you know, instilled in every American's, you know, mindset.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you had said about this idea of a threat to their livelihood, and the way it is a threat to the stability of social structure. Like at the time, this is
oh
like
my God, yeah, at the time.
height. This is the height of like the lynching era in after. During Reconstruction and into the 20s, Birth of a Nation gets released in 1915. World War I just happened. So it's just like this really vulnerable place. And here we see an African American community that's really, you know, in a sense, rising up from things that are pushing them down. And I just don't, like it's like you said, when you first hear about this, like now that I'm kind of thinking about it, maybe like I did hear about it here and there, but it was always deemed the Tulsa race riot, right? Like it's this racial riot that occurs. And I think just, you know, somewhat recently in the past couple of years, it turned to a massacre, because no matter how hard Black Tulsans fought to protect their property that was being burned and they were being shot in the streets, they're outnumbered. And they don't have help from the government. Even to this day, no one, like not one of the criminal acts has been prosecuted or punished by a government at any level. And this is off of tulsahistory.org, municipal, county, state, or federal. And think about that. Like people are getting away with something that's destroying homes. People are losing millions of dollars. Like some of the founders of Greenwood, they don't rebuild there. They just take the loss essentially. And it's, you know, even Greenwood doesn't fully get destroyed. They get rebuilt, but regardless, like you don't like to play what if game, and I don't either. But you know, who knows what Tulsa, you know, becomes if Greenwood still thrives. And
well, and that's a great point. I want to see what does Greenwood look like today.
Is
like the
it
district
like
that's formed Greenwood, like what I want to know what the environment is around that parts, because you see, you can look and see, like for example, 9/11 ground zero, what happened out of like where that, like the memorial and all this sort of stuff, and like kind of that's a different example, but at the same time you look at it, that event took place in a region and in a location, and what happened to that location, you can see the you know, the history that, you know, predates it, right? So I want to know, like, what does Greenwood look like today because of this event? Like, how did this event shape the region? Because what you were talking about, the West, it was everybody's idea that they needed to move west in order to find themselves, to find their next venture, to, you know,
the
become
economic
capitalism, you know, economic development, opportunity, everything that was embodied by the term westward expansion. And so you can see it across like the country as colonials moved west. You see events like this happening where people are upset that another group is better than them, or they're upset that there's more economic opportunity for a certain individual or certain groups of individuals. And I'm not saying that there were more Tulsa Race Massacres, because this one in itself is extremely violent, deadly, unnecessary, you know, all of the like, but I'm sure there were events similar like this across the country at this time, because of a rising affluent African American, Native American, you know, Pacific Asian American, like these groups that were not fundamentally colonial citizens, you know, the 17, like I'm gonna just go back to this, the 1776ers, like though that group of people, the people that were increasing in, I love the word affluency. I haven't heard in a long time, and you brought it up. It's a great word to describe, you know, wealth.
Yeah. Sorry, you're cutting.
But like people that weren't colonials were, oh, it's okay. Hopefully the recording keeps it.
the people that weren't necessarily the quintessential founders that you think of, right? Say one more time.
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. And you know, you see it everywhere where there's there's money and status at stake. And like I said before, like this is the height of the lynching. There's I remember what I was going to say. I was going to talk about the difference between riot and massacre again, because this was more recent. But essentially, the term riot was given to it for insurance purposes, because insurance companies wouldn't have to pay the benefits to the people who lost their homes and businesses if they deemed it as a riot. So I think that's the biggest pushback now, is deeming it a massacre because of what it ends up turning into. And you know, it's I don't know. It's such a stain on American history, right? And people here again, people are threatened by pushback on their common conceptions. There's people that still deny that it happened, and even today, like. I don't understand. Like, there's footage from, I think Fox News is the one who has the last remaining footage of buildings burning. There's plenty of oral history accounts, and I'm so for my birthday a couple of weeks ago, I got this book, Tulsa 1921. One of the I think he's the chair of African and African American studies at OU. Carlos Hill has a forward in that. He also has a book about photographs, because newspapers were really the way that white people organized for the next day. And you know, the fact that he knew he was going to have a mob come after him and try to lynch Dick Rowland, like, you know, for something that we don't know necessarily how it happened, to think you're going to have this angry mob coming at you with the purpose of killing you is. I mean, I can't fathom that in today's world. Think about, like, you know, and this is such a, like we said, it gets left out of history books, and you know, the 100-year, the centennial is something that brings light to it. And we talked about with other people too, where it's like they have to pass away for things to for us to like really reflect on it. This gets into this deeper thing about House Bill 1775 in Oklahoma now, and other efforts that's just like going to be this domino effect. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because that'll get me a little.
I know it'll get you a little riled up, but the idea that, like, we talk about education and what our attempts are as educators. I'm not saying that I'm an educator, but in a sense that I do stuff that incorporates my skills and techniques and instilling that information on people that are, you know, up and coming. And so I guess that's teaching and educating. So, but in the conversation as being an educator, it's really, really hard for me to understand why we are trying to censor the ability for educators to explain history in a way that encompasses all people, in a way that doesn't single out a certain group or prioritize a group over the other. Educators are being censored in certain areas because of passages of certain laws and, you know, doctrines that they're not allowed to teach. I'm just going to put it bluntly, critical race theory.
Yeah.
And they're not allowed to teach ideas that ultimately allow us as a cult, like a community of people, to get along better. Like, you have to be able to talk about it and educate people in order for them to understand it. And by getting rid of that ability, we lose the opportunity to make the community a safer place for all people, in my opinion. And that's my opinion, and I'm, you know, gonna voice that, but it's hard for me to get behind something that detracts from an educator's ability to tell the historical truth about stuff and how it actually, you know, makes society what it is today. Yeah.
I know some people might not be aware of what House Bill 1775 is, and essentially it's this really vague piece of legislation that does not require individuals to undergo diversity training or some sort of counseling. Essentially bans critical race theory because of the how do we want to put it? Because of it can make a certain group of people feel uncomfortable. In this case, white people. right? Because of the things that white people have done in the past. So now it leaves this really ambiguous, body of water to navigate for educators. Like, is this going to be against is this going to be against the bill? Because it's so vague that it's just, it seems like it's just like I said, the initiator of this domino effect that other states are going to follow suit. I saw a school district that neighbors the one that I went to high school in and middle school, push for these things. And, critical race theory emerges it was an academic movement of civil rights scholars, essentially, to like critically examine the law as it relates to issues of race. So we talk about disenfranchising voting rights and literacy tests for things, and really examining the law in a sense of how it affects different races, like I said. And it takes on this wider thing that's associated with like white supremacy and the people who don't like critical race theory is essentially they say you're relying on social constructionism and elevates storytelling over evidence and reason, right?
Yeah.
And you don't really get the truth that way, and it goes against certain things. And I'm going to preface by saying, like, I'm an American. I have been my whole life. Like, you grow up understanding America in a certain way. You have your certain set of conceptions that you have just through learning about the history of it. And I've always been infatuated with the history of it. But, as you get older in your studies, like, history is supposed to be uncomfortable. Like, people do really bad things. And now we have to be careful how we go about this, because it might offend white people. And despite the urging from the African-American community in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma public schools, or Oklahoma City public school system, the largest in the state, urges against this, and to go ahead and do it anyway, and then have or sign it into law and have language that essentially tries to cover it up by saying, like, oh, we, nobody should feel ashamed of, like, to be a certain race, right? Like, as a white person, you shouldn't feel guilt. And I think that's a whole nother discussion too, like how much guilt you should feel for something that, like, your ancestors may or may not have done, or, like, that's a really touchy thing. But that doesn't mean we can't work through these themes in history and the way, like, the methods that we go about. Like, history is storytelling, essentially.
And I always thought like you should understand and learn history so you don't repeat it.
Yeah, and understand the way things
because you want to avoid, especially looking at the negatives, you want to learn about them and understand them, so okay, let's try to not let that happen again, because look at how devastating it was to groups of people, like countries, continents, even. Like, look at how detrimental it was. Okay, so we're going to avoid teaching about it now, so that way we kind of like sweep it under the rug, essentially, is what this is getting at. But you said something like, we're talking about patriotism, and this is, you hear people saying, well, you're not American if you, like, believe in, certain, these things, like, oh, if there's problems of race, well, then leave, or whatever. Like, you hear those conversations. And for me, I've never not loved my country. And I know you're the exact same way. Like, it comes to a point, though, where you can be a patriot and still think that there are things wrong with your country that need fixing.
Yeah, it's not blindly.
It's not like you need to blindly march into the field of battle and to be a patriot. Like, you can be being a patriot is wanting the best for your country. And now you're going to look at it both ways. You're going to be like, okay, well, if people think this is the best and the other people think this is the best, so then you get politicized and all that stuff. But, like, being able to say, hey, America's like, United States, great country, but we got our problems and we have to learn how to fix them. I keep seeing that narrative that, like, oh, we're going to keep this, this really strong patriotism. America's the greatest country. It's like, well, okay, you really look at it, we're like, not even top 10 in a lot of categories that major countries and our allies are in. And you look at
those statistics are fake. They're fake.
Yeah, you hear those things.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, you kind of have to tone it down a little bit and say, I would fight and die for my country any day of the week. And I know millions of people who have, and thankful for their service and stuff, but you can't tell me that they didn't fight to try to make our country a better place.
Yeah. or end up fighting for the people around them because even though they don't
because
agree
they
with
cared.
it.
Yeah, they cared. Yeah, like they would. Yeah, and so
Does that make
just,
yeah.
yeah.
And
That irks me because you see it all the time that like, oh, that person's not a patriot because they're standing up for a BLM movement and they're not agreeing with this, or like they're not backing the police. It's like, no, my family, I have many police officers, all of them fantastic individuals, and they've all practiced and followed, code of conduct and everything like that. You have to look at, like, there are bad people in every demographic, at every category, every job ever. Like, there's just going to be a bad apple. And it goes to the thing like, oh, I'm not a patriot because I said, hey, I'm going to stand up for somebody who passed away and was wrongfully murdered for no reason, kind of thing. That makes me not a patriot because I'm not backing the blue. It's like, no, I'm backing because there's a social injustice in our country that we need fixing, and it just so happens that this brought it into the spotlight. Unfortunate for both parties, but it's how it is.
And I think that's really important that you can. It's not like you have to be one or the other. And I'm so like, sorry, we're just like venting our problems.
Well, it's okay because
but
it's brought up.
It is a lot. So annoying to have to be put in one category or another. Right. Yeah. Like you have to be like, oh, you're a masker. Okay. Well, like, do you know they don't even work and like all that stuff. Right. Or you're anti-mask, anti whatever. Like you, like there's no in between. And it's the same thing with, politicization of people. And I think it comes to a point where, I was listening and everyone's going to, criticize because of the things that he gets criticized for sometimes. But, Joe Rogan's with Dave Chappelle because Dave Chappelle is a funny dude. And I enjoyed a previous one that he was in. So I listened to it.
They did some skits together too. So they go back a lot.
Yeah. So I listened to it because I don't really, I've shied away from the Joe Rogan hype. I just don't have time. Right. And I was listening to it and he was talking about how he really thinks that this idea of like kindness is going to win. If people can just interact with one another and be able to see that we're all really not that different. And it's just like these arbitrary categories that are really, pitting us against each other. And for no reason, he thinks like all this corruption could get, fleshed out a little bit more if we just kind of like believe and trust in the people around us, like in a community. Right. And I think that's really the important thing. But, when I'm reading the actual text of this bill, it's, at the surface, you're thinking, okay, no teacher, administrator, or other employee can require a course that one race is superior to the other. Okay. Like we can all get behind that, right? That an individual by virtue of his race or sex is inherently racist or sexist. Okay. Like that shouldn't be the case. Right. But these things still like happen. So like, signing an arbitrary bill that stands for something that is clearly against, African-American communities and other places that don't think history is going to be depicted accurately, it is just problematic. And then you look at what President Trump did with the 1776 Commission, this advisory committee that gets put together, and there's no historians on it. So the people that devote their lives to, studying material and understanding the way that our country is, they don't get to be a part of it, right? Because they're going to do something that's against what the whole goal of the propaganda is. Like there's threats to democracy, progressivism, and racism, which it is, and communism and slavery and fascism. And yes, like some of those things are threats to it really rubs me the wrong way. And I know this is kind of like outdated because this was in September of 2020, but like it criticizes feminist movements. There's just like, they want to promote positive stories in American history, and rightfully so. Like everything can't be negative what this country has done. Like we wouldn't be a part of here, today and able to bring you this podcast about it. But I think it's just like really problematic. And yes, like the 1619 project has like some errors in it. But, thoroughly boiling down history to only the good things and not being critical of it. And I'll kind of close here because I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds, but like by doing that, it's just but this is what we like are dealing with today, that all the like it's going to be this domino effect that these vague bills that go out saying you can't force someone to be trained about diversity when we have incidents of blackface and or racist chants on campus like the past 5 years here.
Yeah.
But like these things are happening and we can't be like, okay, well, you can't get trained to start to like begin thinking about your biases and things like that. Like it's just a step backwards, and it makes educators' lives more difficult. And before I get too riled up,
Yeah, no, I know, I can feel it. And I have a lot of stuff that I could say too, but it's topic for a different discussion.
Yeah.
But I just want to kind of end like not uplifting, but the idea that we as a people should. I want to word this the right way. We see an injustice happen for a certain group or category of individuals in our country, and our first immediate thing is to politicize it and bring it into two different camps. Exactly what you were talking about, how we have to pick a side. I don't know where this is like where that came from, but the idea that we have a group of people in dire need of assistance and just kindness from the rest of the people, and yet we still believe that there's some sort of problem inherently existing in them that makes it like the fact that that is still an issue in this day and age, this in our great nation, really puts it under scrutiny. Let's just say that. And I think what you talked about with Dave Chappelle, Joe Rogan, the kindness will win at the end kind of a thing. Like, I go out there every day knowing that people are not like me, but they're also almost like me enough for me to be able to understand what they're going through, right? We're not like everybody else, and everybody else isn't like us, but yet I don't feel the need to think that I'm significantly better or like based off of certain attributes that I have over the other person or vice versa. Like I don't know why that's a difficult concept to understand. And that could just be because we're endowed in the idea that as educators, we have to devote ourselves to unbiased education. Despite our predispositions, despite our beliefs, despite everything that we hold dear to our heart and what we think is true, we have to educate in the manner that is best for the students. And so that is giving them the truth. And whatever that truth may be to people, it's obviously up for an interpretation. But when you have a textbook handed down to you through 17 different departments of education, from federal all the way down to your local municipality, and they all speak the same thing, that's kind of telling you, okay, this is what we need to do. And you're having stuff that directly goes against that. And is it House Bill 1775 and critical race theory ban? Like it just, again, strikes a nerve. It makes it difficult for us to even want to talk about this because we know that there's going to be a stigma around it. Yeah. We're going to have some sort of, connotation that, again, but you have to talk about it. That's the problem, is we don't talk about this stuff enough. And then when people do talk about it, I'm not saying stuff gets fixed, but it brings light to the situation that allows the conversation to keep going. And that's the most important part, just talking about it, because you can't just let it go away. It will come back and rear its ugly head like it has for the past 200 plus years in our country. So
believe me, I get really down and like upset, like reading about some of these things, and history isn't necessarily meant to make you feel like good all the time. And I think that's really important to take with you as we talk about a lot of things, right? There isn't necessarily two camps, and there isn't necessarily there's always multiple sides to history, and thoroughly making it difficult to access it in a different lens is hard. But we should start focusing more on positive history connotations. You said it exactly. History is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, and I'm thinking in my head, like right now, the past 5 historical events that are major to the United States, 4 of them are war victories.
and the other one is the civil rights movement. And so like one of those is extremely positive for a group of people being able to, become, able to vote and able to feel publicly
Legally,
safe.
yeah.
Yeah. And then the other four experiences that I can think of off the top of my head are war engagements that led to the United States allies and the Axis powers or whatever engaging in military conflict, murdering people, civilians, all this sort of stuff. So it's like, wait a minute, like the last 5 things that I could think of that are historical things, 4 of them extremely deadly violent. The other one's deadly and violent on its own, but at least you can see, some sort of light at the end of the tunnel and some sort of uplifting, flash forward to like today's day and age and stuff. But like we got to start focusing as a people to just kind of honor that history existed and do our best to understand it, and maybe the good history try to repeat, and the bad history kind of shelve away and realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't let that happen again. But that's just my 2 cents. That's about all it's worth too.
Yeah, same here. And as we move into, I know the major events were abruptly canceled. I'm still trying to work through and figure out why entirely. But we're happy to share resources. The New York Times has that visual article, which is really, really powerful. I'm listening to Destination Greenwood. It's a podcast published by the OU Daily, which is like our school newspaper here. That's been good. If this is, I encourage you to go, do your research for yourself. And, some of these things are, like we said, are give off bad visceral reactions.
We're not trying to polarize people. Yeah, exactly. No, like we're not trying to exactly polarize people, but like we're sharing what we believe to be the case for these situations, and whether you like it or not, I think there's definitely been evidence of groups of people being adversely affected by other groups of people in our country. Like you look at it throughout time, and so just again having a conversation, especially having conversations that try to just understand it rather than just mindlessly talk about it. I guess like just understanding is one of the, I guess besides perspective, understanding is one of our words that we try to drive home with people. And again, we're no experts, we don't claim to be, we're just students of life and history and just trying to figure it out for ourselves. But this is what we see, and hopefully you guys enjoyed. It's a little bit of a touchy episode, but we get it. But thanks for sticking around.
I think we're gonna try to get Michael back next week.
Yeah,
light up the mood.
We need it a little bit.
We had 2 straight weeks of pretty dark things to talk about.
But
distressful.
Rightfully so. They needed to be talked about. So.
Yeah. Thanks again for supporting. Like we really appreciate it. And again, today's the last day. It's not too late to make your donation if you're capable and willing. Like we said, we got one large 4XLs left.
Yep.
We'd be happy to send that over to you. I know the people that have received it so far are like, wow, this is like really cool. So I encourage you. It's good quality. So all right, we'll see you next week, and hopefully some laughs are in store.
Yeah, I hope so.